The Iron Mask. Rain pounded the cobblestone streets of rural France, turning the night into a blur of silver and shadow. Théodore, a weary traveler, arrived at the old inn just as the lanterns flickered with the dying wind. The inn appeared empty, its wooden sign swaying on rusty hinges, squealing faintly with each gust. Pushing open the door, he was met by a narrow hallway lined with dark portraits and musty tapestries, the scent of damp wood and candle smoke clinging to the air. The innkeeper, an elderly man with hollow eyes, appeared silently, bowing slightly. "You are expected," he murmured, voice dry as parchment, gesturing toward a room at the end of the hall. Théodore hesitated, unsettled by the strange certainty in the man's tone. Inside the room, a single candle burned atop a wooden table, casting long, wavering shadows across the floor. On the wall hung the Iron Mask, ancient and blackened with age, its cold metal surface reflecting the dim candlelight. Théodore felt a shiver trace his spine as his eyes fixed on the mask. There was something unnerving in its stillness, a presence that seemed to observe him in return. Every instinct screamed to turn away, yet he could not. He felt as though the mask had been waiting for him, each curve of its metal silently commanding attention, each hollow eye socket holding a promise of dread. He approached slowly, every creak of the floorboards amplified in the thick silence. The air grew heavier, oppressive, as if the room itself drew a deep, deliberate breath. When he stood directly beneath the mask, Theodore's hand brushed against the table, sending a tremor through his fingers. At that precise moment, he felt a sensation not unlike being watched by a living entity. Shadows in the corners of the room seemed to twitch, moving subtly, imperceptibly, until he turned his head and the corners were empty. His heart beat faster, each pulse echoing the unspoken warning. Do not touch. Do not look too long. Do not remain. The innkeeper returned, placing a glass of water on the table. "Few last here," he said, voice nearly swallowed by the room. "Most cannot endure what it demands." Théodore, puzzled, stared at the man. "Demands? I do not understand." The innkeeper shook his head, expression sorrowful. "It is not understood, only worn, and then it changes you." Theodore's curiosity, mingled with unease, urged him forward. Yet the longer he gazed at the mask, the more he felt a pressure against his skull, a subtle pull as if the mask beckoned, promising knowledge and torment in equal measure. As the storm outside intensified, the candle flickered violently. Théodore, suddenly aware of the stillness around him, noticed that the shadows seemed to gather closer, leaning toward the mask as if drawn by an invisible current. A faint metallic hum filled the air, almost imperceptible at first, then rising steadily, vibrating through the walls, the floor, the very bones of the room. The innkeeper remained in the corner, silent, his eyes fixed not on Théodore, but on the mask, as though he had witnessed the same scene countless times before. The traveler's instincts screamed for retreat, but a compulsion rooted in both fear and fascination forced him to take another step closer. When Théodore finally reached out, fingertips brushing the cold, unyielding metal, a sudden surge of vertigo seized him. Images flashed before his eyes. A man's life trapped behind metal, screams without sound, visions of agony that transcended time. Théodore staggered, clutching the table, and the mask seemed to tilt slightly, unnaturally, toward him. He could feel a faint heat emanating from its surface, a pulse that mimicked a heartbeat not his own. The room held its breath. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, a darker tempest had begun, a force waiting for the traveler to make a choice, to accept or resist the mask's inexorable will. The moment Theodore's fingers brushed the iron mask, a shiver ran down his spine, as though icy tendrils had slithered beneath his skin. A sudden vertigo gripped him, forcing him to grip the table for support. The candlelight flickered violently, casting shifting shadows that elongated and twisted into unrecognizable forms. The mask's surface seemed almost liquid, reflecting not his own face, but flashes of other faces, anguished, angry, twisted in silent screams. He blinked, and the images shifted, showing moments of betrayal, despair, and violent ends, each scene impossible to ignore. The air thickened, pressing against his lungs, and a metallic taste filled his mouth, sharp and coppery, as though the mask exhaled its torment into the room itself. The innkeeper remained silent, merely observing, as if he had witnessed this very transformation countless times before. Theodore's mind teetered between fascination and horror. He tried to step back, but the shadows on the walls now moved independently, forming thin, claw-like fingers that reached toward him, intertwining with his own. The mask seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat, each throb drawing him closer into its dominion. He felt compelled to lift it, to place it upon his face, and with each passing second, the urge grew stronger, an irresistible lure masked by the promise of knowledge and power. Tentatively, he raised his hands, trembling. The mask's cold surface kissed his fingers, and a sudden vision gripped him fully. He was no longer in the inn, but in a hall of mirrors, endless and infinite, each reflection a twisted version of himself. In some, his eyes were hollow. In others, his mouth gaped in eternal scream. He tried to turn away, but invisible chains anchored him to the spot. Whispers, low at first, rose to a cacophony of voices, each speaking in tongues both familiar and alien. Where see, become, obey. The sounds echoed inside his skull, merging with the storm outside, shaking the inn as though it were a vessel for the mask's growing consciousness. The shadows in the corners shifted with alarming speed, materializing into vague humanoid forms. They moved with unnatural grace, circling him, weaving patterns that suggested anticipation, hunger, and malice. Theodore could feel the pull of the mask not just on his hands, but on his mind, tugging at memories, dredging up fears he had long buried. Faces from his past, friends, strangers, and enemies, flashed in the mirrors, mingling with images of deaths he had never witnessed, each whispering accusations he could neither refute nor ignore. The sensation was dizzying. The room seemed to contract, pressing him toward the hearth as if to force him into confrontation. He stumbled, gripping the edge of the table, and the mask's pulse grew stronger, a tangible rhythm that invaded his senses. Sweat beaded on his forehead as the temperature seemed to drop and rise erratically, a storm in miniature contained within the walls of the parlor. The shadows reached closer, elongating their limbs unnaturally, scraping against the floorboards, and the whispers coalesced into a single, demanding voice. Touch no become. Theodore's vision swam. His body felt both heavier and lighter, simultaneously drawn toward and repelled by the mask. Panic threatened to overwhelm reason, yet a stubborn curiosity kept him rooted. Then, as if acknowledging his hesitation, the mask's hollow eyes seemed to flare with a faint red glow. The reflection in the nearest mirror rippled, showing not the room, but a chamber filled with countless iron masks, each perched upon a silent figure, their faces obscured, their fates sealed. The knowledge pressed upon him. Those who had worn the mask were never truly free. Théodore's pulse quickened. He realized the innkeeper had not been merely a guide, but a witness and perhaps a guardian, someone who understood the cost of yielding. And yet, the mask pulsed insistently, whispering promises of insight, mastery, and the unbearable temptation of transcending mortality itself. As the storm outside thundered and lightning flashed across the sky, Théodore felt an almost imperceptible pull in his chest. He was standing at the precipice between obedience and resistance, curiosity and survival. Every fiber of his being screamed to resist, yet every instinct whispered to surrender. The room seemed to hold its breath, the shadows frozen mid-lunge, the mirrors reflecting a reality that was not entirely his own. One hand hovered above the mask, uncertain, trembling, as the innkeeper's solemn eyes bore into him with quiet warning. The choice was his, but the consequences, he realized, were already set in motion. Théodore's hand hovered above the cold, unyielding iron. Every nerve in his body screamed to withdraw, yet the mask's silent allure drew him forward, a magnet for both dread and curiosity. The shadows around him quivered, forming shapes that seemed to mimic his movements, though twisted and grotesque, like mocking doubles. A faint metallic hum filled the room, growing steadily into a resonance that vibrated through his bones, making it impossible to distinguish his own heartbeat from the rhythm emanating from the mask. The innkeeper remained in his corner, expression grave, hands folded, a silent witness to the unfolding struggle between man and artifact. Tentatively, Théodore brushed the mask with his fingertips. A jolt, sharp as lightning, coursed through him, and his vision blurred. The parlor around him shifted, walls bending and stretching as though the room itself had become liquid. He stumbled back, gasping, yet found himself rooted in place. From the hearth, tendrils of black smoke curled upward, reaching toward his face, weaving around his limbs with a sticky, insistent pressure. Whispers erupted once more, louder and more insistent than before. Where understand, become. Each word echoed inside his skull, bypassing ears entirely, resonating directly in his thoughts. As he struggled to maintain composure, Théodore felt an unfamiliar weight pressing upon his head. The mask had not yet touched him, but its influence manifested physically, as if it sought to claim him without consent. His vision darted to the nearest mirror, and he froze. In the reflection, he saw not himself, but a figure wearing the iron mask, eyes hollow, expressionless, yet undeniably his own. The figure raised a hand, beckoning him toward the hearth. Panic clawed at his chest, but a perverse fascination kept him moving, drawn toward the fireplace as if guided by an invisible tether. Suddenly, a sound like grinding metal filled the room. The shadows lurched forward, elongating and converging around Théodore. Each movement of the mass seemed purposeful, a calculated effort to trap him, to push him into yielding. The candlelight flickered violently, and sparks erupted from the hearth, forming fleeting images. Men and women contorted in agony, their faces obscured by iron, bodies bound by invisible force. Théodore felt nausea rise, as if the room had become a vessel of memory and suffering, each scene a fragment of lives absorbed by the mask over centuries. He staggered, clutching his head, desperate to hold on to reality, yet the boundaries between self and object, living and inanimate, blurred perceptibly. The innkeeper's voice broke the cacophony, low and urgent. Do not let it claim your mind. Its power feeds on doubt, fear, and surrender. Theodore's gaze flicked to the man. The words grounded him, momentarily cutting through the hypnotic pull. Yet the mask's hum persisted, insistent, a relentless heartbeat that refused to be ignored. It pulsed in time with his own, a parasitic rhythm that seemed intent on synchronizing life and thought with the artifact. The walls throbbed, shadows stretched, and every mirror reflected countless iterations of himself, each one wearing the iron mask, trapped in silent torment. With trembling hands, Théodore gripped the edge of the table. He could feel his own mind fracturing under the pressure, thoughts fragmenting, memories colliding, fear coiling around him like a living entity. The mask's pull intensified, an invisible pressure against his skull, urging him forward. He realized, in a bone-deep certainty, that the iron mask demanded submission, yet he had the faintest glimmer of resistance, awareness of self, the spark of will. But the parlor and its dark occupant would not relent. Shadows surged, filling the room, pressing against every wall, crawling along the floor, and the metallic hum escalated into a deafening resonance that made his teeth rattle. Theodore's pulse hammered, yet he fought to focus. He breathed deeply, counting in silent defiance, grounding himself in the sensation of the wooden floor beneath his feet, the candle's waxy scent, the distant rumble of thunder. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet his body remained, suspended between motion and restraint, a puppet in a battle of wills. The mask's influence was no longer subtle. It was a force that sought to merge with him, to dominate thought, to dissolve the boundary between observer and artifact. He understood, with terrifying clarity, that the choice was not merely whether to wear the mask, but whether to retain the self he had always known. Theodore's knees buckled as the room seemed to contract around him, the walls bending and warping as though the parlor itself had become sentient. The shadows converged into dense, undulating masses, pressing against every surface, encircling him with invisible fingers that tugged at his clothing, his hair, even his thoughts. The iron mask on the wall pulsed with a deep, resonant thrum, each beat in perfect synchrony with his racing heart. He could feel the pull now, not only on his mind but on his body, a magnetic, almost malevolent force drawing him closer to the hearth, toward the mask, demanding compliance. The air thickened, breathing became a labor, each inhale scraping raw against his lungs. From the corners, faces began to emerge, twisted, faceless figures wearing masks identical to the iron one above the fireplace. They mirrored his every movement, yet in exaggerated, grotesque fashion, their silent screams rippling through the room like a cold wind. The mirrors reflected countless versions of himself, each iteration trapped behind metal, eyes hollow, body rigid, eternally bound. Théodore staggered, clutching the table, his knuckles white, sweat beading on his forehead. A metallic taste filled his mouth, coppery and bitter, as if the mask's influence seeped into him with every heartbeat. The innkeeper stepped forward, voice low but urgent. "You cannot yield. It will consume all that you are and leave nothing but echoes." Theodore's gaze flicked toward him, but the words barely penetrated the thrumming pressure that now enveloped him. The shadows shifted again, faster, forming tall, spindly figures whose limbs writhed like living iron. The mask's pulse accelerated, a hypnotic rhythm that threatened to override reason, each throb driving him closer to the edge of submission. His fingers twitched involuntarily, drawn toward the cold metal surface, as if his body had become a puppet to a force older than time itself. The room convulsed, furniture quaking, candles sputtering as though fighting to remain alight. Theodore's vision blurred. The iron mask seemed to detach itself from the wall, hovering a mere inch away from his face, the hollow eyes glowing faintly red. He felt the pressure intensify, now a tangible weight upon his skull, a relentless force threatening to merge with his very consciousness. A whisper, low and insistent, vibrated directly in his mind, where accept become. He could feel the iron grip not just on his thoughts, but on the very marrow of his bones, an invasive, alien will pressing into every corner of his being. With a trembling gasp, Théodore fell to the floor, hands shielding his head, yet the mask's pull remained unrelenting. The mirrors now reflected 1,000 possibilities of surrender, each a version of himself kneeling, encased in iron, faceless, voiceless, consumed. He felt panic rise, ball burning at the back of his throat, yet a flicker of defiance ignited within him, a stubborn thread of consciousness refusing to dissolve. Slowly, he forced himself upright, hands trembling, feet unsteady, eyes locked on the hovering mask. Every muscle screamed against the compulsion, every nerve a battlefield between surrender and self-preservation. Then, as lightning tore across the stormy sky outside, the parlor seemed to pause. The shadows hesitated, the mirrors stilled, the mask's pulse faltered, and Théodore, with a Herculean effort of will, tore his gaze away. The thrumming slowed, the weight lifted slightly, though the oppressive aura lingered. He staggered backward, breath ragged, eyes wide, heart pounding with the realization that the iron mask's hunger had not been sated, merely postponed. The innkeeper remained silent, watching, as if acknowledging the temporary reprieve. Théodore understood then that the mask was not an object to be conquered or destroyed. It was a force that required vigilance, courage, and a readiness to resist at all costs. As the storm outside softened into a steady rain, the shadows receded to their corners. The mirrors returned to reflections of the room alone, and the mask hung once more upon the wall, inert but undeniably potent. Theodore's hand shook as he stumbled toward the door, every step a reminder of the near-fatal encounter. Yet he knew the mask would wait, patient, enduring, and infinitely hungry for the next soul who dared to linger too long in its presence. The parlor had spared him this night, but only the night. Its legacy, carved in iron and shadows, would endure, silent, unyielding, eternal. Théodore sat heavily on the inn's worn wooden bench, chest heaving, sweat mingling with the lingering damp from the storm outside. The parlor lay silent behind him, the iron mask once again inert on its wall mount, shadows retreating into corners, mirrors reflecting only the flickering candlelight. Yet even in its apparent dormancy, a palpable tension lingered in the air, as though the room exhaled slowly, savoring the temporary reprieve. Every nerve in his body remained taut, muscles unwilling to fully relax, mind haunted by fleeting glimpses of the countless faces trapped behind iron, each a warning of the consequences of surrender. He rose slowly, aware that every step toward the door was an act of defiance against the lingering compulsion that had gripped him. The innkeeper watched silently, expression unreadable, eyes reflecting both empathy and a grim acknowledgement of the parlor's power. "Few leave untouched," the old man said softly, voice carrying an edge of resigned sorrow. "Those who do are forever changed, marked by what they have glimpsed. The mask watches, it waits, and it remembers." Théodore swallowed hard, heart pounding. The weight of his near submission pressed on him, not physically, but in a manner far more insidious, the imprint of fear and resistance etched into his very consciousness. Stepping into the hallway, Théodore glanced back one last time. The candlelight flickered over the iron mask, and for a fleeting instant, he could have sworn its hollow eyes gleamed, reflecting not the room, but 1,000 unseen presences, restless, patient, and infinitely watchful. A cold draft swept the hallway, carrying with it the faint metallic whisper he had learned to dread. Soon again, he shivered, realizing the mask's hunger was far from sated. Even as he turned to leave, the knowledge remained. It did not merely reside in the room. It lingered in the mind, a seed of obsession, a shadow of inevitability. Outside, the storm had softened to a steady drizzle, water pooling in rivulets along the cobblestones. Theodore's footsteps echoed hollowly as he made his way through the mist-shrouded village, each step an assertion of freedom, yet each echo a reminder that he carried the parlor's influence within him. The mask, he understood now, was a force older than the inn, older than the building itself, a conduit of despair and temptation, capable of bending the will of any who dared approach it. Its hunger was endless, and those who survived its immediate grasp bore the memory like a scar, invisible but indelible. He paused at the bridge leading out of the village, gazing down at the churning river below. Reflection shimmered on the water, and for a fleeting moment, he thought he saw his own face transformed, eyes hollow, expressionless, the iron mask seamlessly fused with his features. He blinked, and the vision vanished, yet the unease remained. The knowledge settled heavily. Survival was merely temporary. One day, the mask would call again, and he, or someone else, would return to its embrace, the cycle repeating endlessly. Théodore drew a deep, shuddering breath, forcing himself forward. He knew he had escaped the parlor for now, but the shadow of the iron mask would follow him, a constant reminder of temptation, fear, and the fragility of free will. By nightfall, he reached the edge of the village, lanterns swaying in hand, mist curling around his boots. The inn receded into the darkness behind him, silent, brooding, and patient. Théodore did not look back again. Yet in the deepest recesses of his mind, he felt the faint echo of the iron mask's pulse, a whisper of inevitability, an enduring promise that its story was far from over. Somewhere, beyond the veil of shadow and time, it waited, hungry, patient, eternal. The end for now.